2023 was an enormous failure for the American comic book industry. A lot of retailers are struggling, and a lot of that has to do with poor quality. We're not supposed to talk about what that poor quality entails, but we do know who some of these writers bringing that poor quality to the comic book industry are, and I thought this would be a fun little experiment. If you ever go to Comic Book Revolution, they have the best coverage when it comes to sales analysis and all that stuff. We have very limited data. It is derived from Comic Hub, which is a program used by only like 100, 120 shops across America. So it's a very small percentage of actual sales, but it is derived from actual sales to customers, not sales to comic book shops. And it does give us a general idea what the trends are. And they have the Tini Howard Award every single month for the writer with the most dead comic books walking. And a dead comic book walking is any comic book from DC or Marvel that is ranked outside the top 100. DC and Marvel are ready to cancel these titles because the sales just aren't there. Sometimes they will keep a dead title walking going on for a long time, like the Captain Marvel run from Kelly Thompson. But for the most part, these titles don't last very long. And the Tini Howard Award goes to the writer that has the most dead titles walking. And in December of 2023, they actually had 10 writers qualified for it. And I don't remember having quite so many. So I thought it would be a fun experiment to kind of talk about these writers, the projects they were on, and why these things failed. And it does absolutely nail down who was the worst writer for Marvel and DC in 2023 by the end. Basically, like I said, there's 10 writers here, 2 that certainly do not belong. They have far too much talent. There are 3 that are basically nobodies, no names, but certainly not the worst writers in comic books because they don't get enough work. And then there's 4 finalists, the absolute worst of the worst, the creme de la crap of comic book writers at DC and Marvel. And you will recognize all these names. Let's start out with the 2 guys that should not have been on this list. Philip Kennedy Johnson had 2 issues with Action Comics 2023 Annual number 1 at the number 102 spot, and Green Lantern War Journal number 4 at number 137. Rodney Barnes had 2 issues with Luke Cage Gang War number 2 at the number 119 spot, and Star Wars The Mandalorian Season 2 number 7 at the number 151 spot. PKJ should not be there because he's just too good of a writer, but also one of the flaws in these rankings is if a comic book comes out like with 1 or 2 days left in the month, you only get 1 or 2 days worth of sales rather than a full week calculated into the rankings. So a book like Action Comics Annual 2023 that came out at the very end of December of 2023, like with a day or 2 left in the year, obviously during holiday season, it is going to be lower value than it should be. So Action Comics Annual is likely well into the top 60. And I would say Green Lantern War Journal is a decent book. It's not great, but there is a better Green Lantern book out there. So I can understand why that one's down there. Rodney Barnes is also a really good writer. I know he's done a lot of work in Hollywood. He had the really cool Philadelphia series, which is ongoing from Image. But Marvel, for some reason, will not give him a good book to write. You know, The Mandalorian is just an adaptation of the 2nd season of Mandalorian. And he did have plans for Luke Cage Gang War, but apparently Marvel editorial just came in there and blew him up and changed all of his story elements and all that kind of stuff. So that's not really on him. Although The Mandalorian Season 2, like number 1, debuted in the top 10. And it kind of shows you the staying power of that series. And maybe the shine has wore off of The Mandalorian over time. So those 2 guys, I do not believe should be there because they're actually really talented writers. Let's get to the 3 no-names that really just don't get enough work to be considered among the worst writers in the industry. Ethan Sachs had 2 issues with Star Wars Bounty Hunter 41 at number 105, and DC's 'Twas the Might Before Christmas number 1 at spot 149. Josh Trujillo had 2 issues with DC's 'Twas the Might Before Christmas number 1 at number 149, and Blue Beetle number 4 at 163. And Jarrett Williams had 2 issues with Titans Beast World Tour Central City number 1 at number 173 and Speed Force number 2, which was unranked. Now, obviously, you probably never heard of those 3 writers, maybe Ethan Sachs, but likely not Josh Trujillo or Jarrett Williams. But their second books were all anthology books. DC's 'Twas the Might Before Christmas, not a serious book. And all the tie-ins to DC's Titans Beast World have been awful. What's interesting is I thought Ethan Sachs was going to be somebody after I read his Old Man Hawkeye with Marco Cicchetto on art. It's a really cool series. It turns out that was an aberration. He's actually a very average to a below average comic book writer. Josh Trujillo, he's the Blue Beetle guy for some reason. He was also, I think, Sina Grace's roommate at one time, not a good writer. Jarrett Williams, to my knowledge, he's really only worked on Speed Force. I don't know of any other major works that he's had outside of that anthology story in Titans Beast World. And Speed Force is admittedly awful, like really, really terrible, like unreadable terrible. And it's not because of woke or SJW. It's just really, really bad execution and bad concepts. And he probably shouldn't be writing a DC miniseries featuring Avery Ho and Wallace West or whatever. Even as inconsequential as those characters are, he should probably be doing backup stories in Flash with these characters or something like that. So that book likely never should have been greenlit in the first place, but nobody knows who those guys are. And it's not like everyone's beating down the door to hire Ethan Sachs, Josh Trujillo, and Jarrett Williams. They just don't get enough work at Marvel or DC to be considered among the worst writers for the entire year. Now let's get into some of the favorites. We'll start out with the boy favorites, and then we'll get into the girl favorites. Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly had 2 issues with Outsiders #2 at number 142. And Batman Beyond Neo-Gothic #6, which was unranked. Steve Orlando had 2 issues with Astonishing Iceman #5 at number 122. And Titans Beast World Tour Metropolis #1 at spot 130. Orlando earns the distinction as the only writer with issues from both Marvel and DC Comics in the Dead Titles Walking category. Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly at DC and Marvel, and how I don't understand how these guys get any work. And it's insane. You know, Batman Beyond, a Batman title, unranked at issue #6. Outsiders, a Batman adjacent title, has Batman related characters, supposedly an homage to Planetary, which I am. Cheap plug right here. We are doing a read through of Planetary from Warren Ellis on the Patreon every single week if you're a fan of that character. But to have 2 titles with that much stuff behind them and neither of them work, Outsiders #2 outside the top 100 on issue #2, just tells you just how dead these guys are. But we kind of already knew that. They had a Captain America Steve Rogers book not make it past 12 issues. That is fucking hard work to actually write a Captain America series starring Steve Rogers that had 0 staying power or interest in the book. But we knew those guys were awful. There's nothing good about their writing. And we like to make fun of them here on the channel because they are so awful. But the proof is in the pudding. Nobody buys their books either. Steve Orlando. What else can you say about Steve Orlando? He's the Steve Orlando of comic books. Ever since he went over to Marvel Comics and joined into the X-Men line, his writing went from not very good to absolutely terrible. You know, his work on Marauders with his Dream Raper character, Somnus, which is basically a self-insert character, was really, really bad. And obviously his work on Astonishing Iceman just isn't very good. It's all about Iceman and Romeo brought Iceman back from the dead because he loved him so much, and this weird relationship that they have that is really, really unhealthy and creepy. But I don't think Steve Orlando or the people at Marvel Comics see that. Not shocking to see that there's no staying power on that character, although that's not all Steve Orlando's fault. Obviously, Sienna Grace and Brian Michael Bendis had something to do with that, but Steve Orlando has also ruined his own reputation at this point, especially with all his work in Marvel Comics. And the new Spider-Man 2099 series will automatically go right to the Dead Titles Walking as well, because nobody buys Steve Orlando books because they see his name on the title and they go, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He absolutely sucks. The other finalists that we have, the girl finalists, Tini Howard had 2 issues with Catwoman #60 at number 111 and Harley Quinn #35 at the number 150 spot. Alyssa Wong had 2 issues with Star Wars Dr. Aphra 39 at the number 134 spot and Captain Marvel #3 at the number 169 spot. Not surprising to see Tini Howard amongst the finalists, the real favorites to win this competition, considering the award is named after her. She certainly made her reputation as a terrible comic book writer at Marvel Comics. In my opinion, has never actually written a competent story yet. Has she written a good issue? Maybe, but I've failed to see it at this point. She actually made Thanos not cool. She made Thunderbolts not cool. She certainly made Betsy Braddock, Excalibur, and all that stuff not cool. Basically made a Jonathan Hickman X-Men event and Ted of Swords not sell. Moved over to DC Comics and somehow got worse. Gotham War. What an enormous bomb that one was. Her time on Catwoman has just been horrific. And somehow she's actually done worse on Harley Quinn, who's supposed to be a major league character. That's supposed to be a prime-time hero for DC Comics, and for some reason, they keep handing Harley Quinn over to buffoons and getting terrible sales. Alyssa Wong, the person that got their job at Marvel Comics by basically outing C.B. Cebulski and calling him a racist, therefore he must hire her to work on their line. Dr. Aphra has been a dead title walking for about 2 years now, but Marvel Comics, for some reason, refuses to cancel the book. We're told Captain Marvel is another A-list character, one of the most vital characters in the Marvel Comics universe, yet on issue #3, already in Dead Titles Walking, almost unranked at number 169. Not surprised. If you go read that Captain Marvel series and you're a Captain Marvel fan, you will be very disappointed because it's not actually about Captain Marvel. It's about Yuta Yang or whatever this character is that is basically Alyssa Wong's self-insert character that she put into the book. The book is actually all about her, while Captain Marvel marvels at just how amazing she is. And not surprising to see Colin Kelly, Jackson Lanzing, Steve Orlando, Tini Howard, and Alyssa Wong among the favorites, the real finalists to come in as the worst writer 2023. But we do have a 10-way tie. But Comic Book Revolution does have a way to suss this out and come to a clear winner. Let's hear how they get to the final two. With all 10 writers tied for 2 issues apiece, we get to our first tiebreaker. Writers with issues and ongoing titles beat out writers with issues that are on one-shots or part of limited series. Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly get eliminated since their 2 issues were from limited series titles. That is a major league upset. Steve Orlando is eliminated since one of his issues is a one-shot and the other is from a limited series. Another favorite goes down. Ethan Sachs, Josh Trujillo, and Jarrett Williams all get eliminated since they all had one-shot issues as one of their issues. So the 3 no-names go out the door. Phil Kennedy Johnson is eliminated since one of his issues was an annual. Roddy Barnes gets eliminated since one of his issues was one from a miniseries. And that makes sense. We did think Colin Kelly and Jackson Lanzing had a chance to become finalists and really nail it down for the worst writer 2023. They didn't quite make it, nor did Steve Orlando, which certainly was probably a betting favorite coming in here. But I do think we got the 2 correct writers in the end. Tini Howard, Alyssa Wong, 2 writers that continue to be employed despite 0 track record of sales success literally anywhere. Not at Marvel, not at DC, not on the indie books. Go and get Tini Howard onto your YouTube channel. See how many views you get for that interview. You'll get about 12 because no one cares about that writer. And we know that Alyssa Wong is far more interested in queering up Star Wars and Marvel Comics than she is in actually telling competent stories. She actually talked about it in an entire panel, which I did in a video a few months later. Now let's get to the big winner because there can only be one. They can't tie. That leaves Tini Howard and Alyssa Wong as the only writers with 2 issues in the Dead Walking Titles category that are both from ongoing titles. Time for the second tiebreaker. The writer with the lowest sales ranking average wins. Tini Howard's 2 titles averaged a 130.5 sales ranking. Alyssa Wong's 2 titles averaged a 151.5 sales ranking. Therefore, the Tini Howard Award for December 2023 goes to Alyssa Wong. I would say that that is well earned and a big upset. I mean, the award is named after Tini Howard, but Alyssa Wong was just bad enough and just employed enough to actually sneak in there and steal her own award out from underneath her. I imagine Tini Howard is probably pretty happy to give up this month's title, but Alyssa Wong really is a plague unto the comic book industry itself. I do not know what Marvel Comics are thinking every time they give this person work. DC Comics even brought her in to disastrous results. Remember Spirit World? What did that one last? 4 issues? Before they had to cancel it because the sales were so bad on that one. Neither of these writers can write a lick, and they both deserve this award. Really, they should be holding it together. Now, Alyssa Wong, actually, from time to time, can write a good comic book story, but every single thing that she writes eventually becomes overwhelmed by her LGBTQ plus agenda stuff, whereas Tini Howard is basically just a really below average writer that's really boring and has no concept on how to tell his story that makes sense or is fun to read. But this was a whole lot of fun. I enjoyed doing this one, and a tip of the cap to the boys over there at Comic Book Revolution for doing this. And if you're looking for more comic book content as far as reviews, Q&A and all that kind of stuff, you need to go over to the Patreon. We're doing the Comics Guild read-throughs for Planetary, for Middle World. We're doing the Q&A with Doc. We're doing the Hot or Not show with Jim. We've also got a pop culture show with Aaron Sparrow called The Geek Fix. If you have not checked that out, there's a link in the video description. And I think we have a lot more great content that you're going to love.